The wind had changed. Darien noticed it before the vent system did, an instinct built from years of silence. The kind of shift you feel in your ribs before it hits your skin. It swept through the top floors of the tower like a breath being drawn. Inward, coiling along the rusted ducts and pressing faintly against the greenhouse glass. He paused, hand deep in the soil bed where the new root clusters were stabilizing. The air wasn't just colder. It was expectant. 42 floors above what was once a central administration block, the remains of Kuran's Edge stood like a forgotten limb of civilization, wrapped in mist and quiet decay. The lower sectors had collapsed years ago, and with them went the power grid, the traffic nodes, and any semblance of organized life. Darien stayed. Not out of defiance. He wasn't the defiant kind. He just didn't need anyone anymore. His greenhouse worked. His reports sent when possible. His oxygen mix was steady, his crops responsive. That was enough. Then the buzzer cracked the silence. It didn't whine or echo. It snapped a single mechanical bark that didn't belong. Darien froze mid-motion, a sprout suspended in his gloved fingers. No one visited. The lift was long dead. The door override only activated manually from the outside. That meant someone had climbed 42 flights. In this weather, he stood slowly, not panicked, just careful. Measured steps brought him to the narrow steel panel beside the door, where a broken screen displayed static and the flicker of movement. 2 figures, female, one tall, one small, standing motionless in the cold rain. He unlocked the door. It opened with a low hydraulic click, followed by the rush of damp wind and the scent of rust and wet concrete. The girl stepped forward first, small, thin, skin the color of faded blue. Ash, her hair was black, plastered flat to her scalp by the rain. She looked up at him with eyes too calm for her age. "My mother died today," she said. Her voice cracked in the middle, but she didn't flinch. "Can I stay with you?" Behind her, the older woman moved forward like a shadow made solid. Tall, drenched, barely clothed. A silk wrap skirt torn at the thigh. One of her shoulders bare, the other barely holding the remains of a top. Her skin shimmered faintly in the greenhouse light, a telltale sign of Xenialan descent. She didn't speak. She didn't plead. She only stood with her hands at her sides and her gaze locked to his, waiting. Darien said nothing. He didn't ask where they came from or why. The girl spoke as if reading a line. He didn't ask what happened to the real mother. He just stepped back. The girl entered first, her bare feet tapping against the metal floor, followed by the woman, who never broke eye contact until she passed him. Darien closed the door behind them and locked it manually. Water pooled beneath them. The girl began to shake now, delayed adrenaline. The woman didn't. Her hands flexed once, then relaxed. She was ready for a fight that hadn't come. He pointed to the washroom alcove. "Towels? Get dry." She nodded once and nudged the girl forward with a soft guiding hand. They disappeared into the side room. Darien stood alone again, watching. The puddle they'd left behind. The girl's voice echoed in his mind, soft and shaped. "My mother died today." He didn't believe her. Not fully. It was too rehearsed. Too precise. But the desperation in her eyes, that part was real. He'd seen it before. And this time, he didn't turn away from it. The tower didn't sleep that night. Not really. The generators hummed low, the vents exhaled recycled warmth, and the rain scratched faintly against the glass panels high above the greenhouse dome. But beneath it all, something else had settled, a new kind of silence. Not the comfortable, solitary kind Darien was used to. This one was heavier, shared. The silence of people trying not to make noise, trying not to intrude, trying not to be seen too much, too fast. Darien didn't sleep either. He lay on a rolled mat near the irrigation hub, a blanket draped loosely over his legs. His body was still, but his mind wasn't. He kept hearing her voice. The girl's words, "My mother died today." It was too clean, too exact, too practiced. Like something memorized in a mirror. A shield forged from syllables. He didn't believe her, but he didn't need to. The desperation had been real. That was enough. In the side room, the old cot creaked once, softly, as if shifting under the weight of someone trying not to move. Then nothing. Darien stared into the low golden light from the hallway vent and let the thoughts keep moving. A child, an alien. A woman whose eyes didn't blink until she was inside. 42 floors they climbed. No weapons, no bags, no questions asked. He heard her before he saw her, fabric brushing metal, a footstep too soft to be accidental. Darien turned his head. The girl Elia, she had said, stood in the corridor, towel tied awkwardly around her body. Bare feet, hair still damp and uncombed. She wasn't crying. Her eyes were wide but not afraid. "I can't sleep," she said. He sat up slowly, motioning her to sit near the heat vent. She obeyed, folding herself onto the floor cross-legged, towel fisted at her chest like armor. "I don't know what to do now," she said, almost whispering. Darien didn't answer right away. He got up, crossed the room, and returned with a piece of dried starch bread, warmed slightly from the vent coils. He handed it to her with a cup of water. She took both, held them for a moment. Then, "Are you the only one here?" He nodded. "Why?" "Because it's easier." Elia took a bite, slow and deliberate. Then she looked up. "I don't think it is." Before he could reply, Naren appeared. She wore one of his old shirts now, oversized and loose, the hem reaching just above her knees. Her hair was tied back with a strip of cloth. Her bare feet made no sound against the metal. Her face was unreadable. "She couldn't sleep," Darien said. Naren glanced at the girl, then back at him. "She hasn't, in days." There was a flicker there. A crack. In the mask. "Not weakness history." Darien gestured toward the back of the greenhouse. "I'll make more room." Naren followed him as Ilya continued eating, eyes never leaving them. In the far corner, beyond the hydropes, Darien knelt by a storage crate and pulled out a folded cot frame. "She said her mother died today," he said without looking up. Naren didn't answer immediately. "She told me the same thing," she said finally. Darien paused. "Is it true?" Naren didn't flinch. "She believes it." "That's not what I asked." Naren stepped closer. Her voice was soft, but sharp-edged. "Does it matter?" He looked at her. "Yes." She took a long breath. Then no. "Not?" "Exactly. Her mother was taken 3 weeks ago. She was told she'd never see her again. Ilya came to me bleeding, barefoot. The first thing she said was, 'My mother's gone. So now you're mine.'" Darien closed the cot with more force. "Than needed." "She lied. She survived," Naren corrected. Their eyes locked. Neither blinked. Darien didn't respond. He set the cot beside the first one and walked back to the console hub. When he returned later that night, Ilya was asleep, curled tightly under a blanket, the crust of starch bread still clutched in one hand. Naren sat on the cot's edge, silent. "You don't owe me anything," Darien said. "I know," she replied. "That's why I'm still here." He nodded. "Once, if you're running from something, I need to know what." Naren's voice didn't tremble. "We're not running, not anymore. We're just not ready to stop hiding." He didn't press her. "Not yet." He just said, "This place stays quiet. No signals, no transmissions." "If you brought trouble—" "I didn't," she interrupted. "A trouble has a way of finding her." Darien looked back toward Ilya. The girl didn't stir. Then, faintly, from her sleep, a whisper, "Don't make her leave again." Neither of them moved. Darien exhaled through his nose and said, "She stays? And me?" Naren asked. He met her gaze without hesitation. "If you want to." She nodded, not in gratitude, but acknowledgement. Then she returned to the cot and sat beside the sleeping girl, who reached out in her sleep and grasped Naren's wrist like a lifeline. Darien stood, alone again in the glow of the greenhouse lights, but the silence had changed. This time, it wasn't solitude, it was the sound of not being alone. By the third morning, the rain had thinned to mist, drifting in thin veils across the greenhouse canopy like smoke with nowhere left to rise. The sun was trying weak streaks of light filtered through the fog glass above, illuminating the plants in fractured golden slivers. But Darien wasn't watching the weather. He was watching her boots. Elia's small, mud-streaked boots had been left near the heating vent to dry. He'd passed by them a dozen times without thinking. But today something caught his eye, a faint shimmer on the inside heel of the left boot. It wasn't moisture. It pulsed, just once. Then nothing. He crouched. A closer inspection revealed a small metallic filament woven into the inner lining. It was no accident. A chip. Darien's breath slowed. Not panic. Calculation. He stood, walked silently to the terminal, and powered up the passive trace reader. It flickered, then spat a low beeped report. The chip was dormant now, but had attempted a broadcast 4 days ago. A short-range ping, likely triangulated with a larger relay net, long since broken or out of range. He didn't touch the boot again. Not yet. Instead, he walked to the utility drawer, retrieved a steel containment box, and returned. The chip came free with a twist of fabric and the careful use of a small blade. He sealed it inside the case, locking it with a biometric strip, and slid the box into a deep vent shaft beneath the console. Out of sight. Out of signal. He didn't tell them yet. Behind him, Alia stirred near the heater, half wrapped in a woven blanket, head bowed over a scrap of synth sheet. She wasn't drawing. She was just pushing the stylus into the same spot over and over again, carving a dent that wouldn't go away. "Why don't you wear boots?" she asked suddenly, her voice so quiet it almost disappeared into the hum of the vents. Darien turned. "Inside?" "No," she said. "Ever." He leaned back from the terminal, wiping his hands on a towel. "Because I trust the ground here." She nodded slowly, then added, "My mom wore boots to bed sometimes, when she was scared." Darien didn't reply. Elia's voice dropped further. "Naren hasn't worn boots in 3 days. That landed. Not with a clang, but with a quiet thud in his chest. Later, Naren joined him in the greenhouse bay. She didn't ask. Just rolled up her sleeves and knelt beside the hydro trays. The soil was dark and fragrant, wet from yesterday's nutrient cycle. She scooped it calmly, her hands moving like this was something she'd done in another life. Or maybe just something she needed to believe she could do now. "You've done this before," Darien said. She glanced at him. "I've done worse." They worked in silence for a time. The only sounds were water shifting, roots being trimmed, the soft clink of tools against the tray edges. "I saw something this morning," he said finally, his tone light but too deliberate. Her hands didn't pause. "In the greenhouse?" "In her boot." Now her fingers stopped. She didn't look at him, but her breath caught. "I took it out," he continued. "Sealed. Dormant for now." Naren sat back on her heels. "I didn't know. I believe you." She looked at him, then really looked. Not just eye contact. Recognition. "They could have tracked her?" she asked. "They might have tried, but there's no live signal now. Whoever it was lost her, or stopped looking." Naren folded her arms. "They don't stop." Darien narrowed his gaze. "Whose?" "They?" She hesitated. Before the system fell, There were processing routes for those marked transferable. She and her mother were listed, then reassigned, but someone changed her status manually, detached her from the chain. No destination listed. Just a tag hold. Darien's throat tightened. So they weren't freeing her. No, she said. They were storing her, like freight. She turned back to the hydrobe and dug her hands into the soil again. More forceful this time. I found her on the outskirts, she said. Half conscious, feet bleeding. She chewed through a plastic tie around her wrist. Darien's hands clenched around the tray's edge. She said, You're still alive. So now you're my mother. Naren's voice cracked. I didn't know what else to be, so I said, okay. Darien stood. He crossed the room and reached into a storage locker, pulling out a folded shirt. He set it on the bench beside her, not speaking. Naren looked at it, then at him. For me? He nodded. She didn't thank him. Not with words. But her shoulders dropped just slightly, her breath slowing. That night, as the greenhouse lights dimmed and the generator clicked into low cycle, Elia lay curled in her blanket nest. Darien passed her on his way to secure the terminal logs. She looked up at him. Are we going to have to leave? She asked. No, he said, without hesitation. Her fingers tightened around the blanket. Good. I'm tired of packing. He crouched beside her. This place is safe. I'll make sure of it. She tilted her head. You always talk like that. Like it's your job to keep everyone else okay. Darien smiled faintly. Maybe it is. She reached out and touched his wrist briefly, then turned away and pulled the blanket tighter around her. In the other room, Naren moved quietly. He could hear her folding something. The old towel, maybe. Or her thoughts. Darien returned to his station and stared at the monitor long after the lights had faded. The chip hadn't broadcast again. Not yet, but it would. And when it did, he would be ready. This time, he had something to lose. The tower held its breath. Outside, the sky shifted in colorless waves, mist swirling under filtered sunlight, casting long shadows across the greenhouse glass. Inside, nothing moved but air. It cycled softly through the vents, warm and consistent. But beneath the hum, Darien felt something new. Not tension exactly. Not fear. Weight. As if every molecule inside the tower had grown dense with what was unspoken. He sat near the central nutrient basin, checking vapor pressure readings, but his thoughts were elsewhere, trapped in a loop. The girl. The chip. The lie. The weight of something trying not to break. He hadn't told them he'd traced the chip's serial prefix back to a registry tag used exclusively for unassigned assets. A phrase used to mean alive, but owned. It wasn't a mistake. Someone had intended to shelve Elia like cargo until she became of age, until she could be sold, transferred, or erased. And someone had marked her location with just enough range to find her again. Darien didn't know who. But he knew they hadn't stopped looking. The door to the sleeping room creaked slightly. Not a full open, just enough to signal movement. Naren stepped into the hallway. She wasn't dressed for the day yet. She wore the same oversized shirt, one side slipping off her shoulder, her bare legs catching the warmth of the early light. Her hair was still damp from washing. She looked softer than usual, but her eyes said otherwise. She was ready for a question she already expected. Darien stood and met her halfway. I need to ask you something, he said, voice low. She stopped, met his eyes, then asked. He didn't hesitate. How did Elia really get here? And what happened to her mother? There was no pause, no surprise, only a long, steady breath. She was taken, Naren said. 3 weeks ago, processing transfer. Her mother Tari was flagged as tradable. Elia wasn't yet. Too young. So they separated them. She rubbed her palm, a gesture she Made when she lied, but this time her voice didn't shake. Tari thought it was routine, just temporary. But they never let her see Elia again. Darien stepped closer. So what did Elia see? Naren swallowed hard. Nothing. She was pulled into a side chamber, alone. Some bureaucrat told her flatly, "Your mother died in holding. There's no one left for you now." Darien's jaw clenched. She's 7. Naren nodded slowly. She believed him. There was a pause. Then Naren added, 2 days later, Elia showed up at my door. No shoes, bleeding, carrying a food pouch she'd stolen. She said, "You're still alive. So now you're my mother." Her voice broke. I didn't correct. "Her," she said. I couldn't. She was already clinging to that sentence like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Darien let that sit. He turned slightly, glanced toward the corridor. When she came to my door, he said, "She." Repeated it, word for word. Naren nodded. It wasn't deception. She believed it again. "She's been waiting," he said softly. "Waiting for someone to tell her otherwise." I know. Why haven't you? Naren looked at the wall behind him. Because I don't know what the truth will do to her. What if Tari is alive, but somewhere far worse? What if she's already dead because Elia ran? Darien didn't answer. Not yet. She deserves the truth, he said finally. Naren sank to the edge of the irrigation basin, her arms resting on her knees. I didn't want her to think I replaced someone. I didn't want her to feel stolen. You didn't steal anything, he said, kneeling beside her. You gave her something to hold on to. Her jaw trembled. From the corridor, a voice called out, "I heard you." They both turned. Elia stood. In the doorway, her blanket hanging from one shoulder like a cloak, hair tangled, eyes clear. "I know she's not dead," she said. "But if I say she is, it doesn't hurt as much." She walked forward without hesitation and climbed into Naren's lap, curling against her. "I don't need a real mother," she whispered. "I just need one who stays." Naren wrapped her, arms around her, holding her tight, a breath escaping her like something cracking. Darien stood quietly. He didn't interrupt. Alia looked at him from over Naren's shoulder. "You stayed," she said. He nodded. "I don't think you'll go," she added. He crouched beside them again, met her gaze. "I won't." No one corrected him, because this time it was true. That evening, after the vents quieted and the sun dimmed across the panels, Darien returned to the greenhouse and watched Elia sleep. She'd taken the corner near the heater and made it hers. Neat folds. Symmetrical blankets. A place that belonged only to her. Naren stood near the glass, watching the skyline fade into darkness. "You know," she said softly, "this is the first place where I've stopped counting exits." He looked at her. She continued, "Everywhere I've been, I kept track. Routes out. Time to gather supplies. What to abandon if it came to running." She turned to face him. "But this place, I don't want to know the exits anymore." Darien stepped closer. "You won't need them." They stood in silence, side by side. The vents exhaled once then. Still. A new storm hadn't come. And for the first time since she'd arrived, neither had the need to run. The fourth night came with no wind, no rain, just the soft hush of stillness pressing against the glass above them like a held breath. The vents had lowered to minimal cycle, only humming when needed, and yet Darien couldn't sleep. His body lay still near the greenhouse controls, but his thoughts refused to rest. He wasn't alone anymore. That truth, so quietly accepted in daylight, was heavier in the dark. The sound came gently fabric shifting, the scrape of a barefoot brushing the metal floor. He sat up. Naren stood in the doorway. She hadn't dressed for sleep. She wore one of his thermal shirts again, sleeves rolled, hem brushing mid-thigh. Her hair was loose, falling in waves over her collarbone. Her face wasn't guarded, not this time. But it wasn't open either. It was something in between. She didn't speak. Not right away. She crossed the room with slow, careful steps and stopped in front of him. "Do you know why I offered myself that first night?" she asked. He didn't answer. He waited. "Because I thought you'd ask for it eventually," she said. "If I offered first, I could pretend I was still in control." Her voice wasn't accusing. It was matter of fact. Like revealing a scar that didn't hurt anymore, but still itched in the rain. "I was wrong," she added. "You didn't ask. You never even looked at me that way." Darien looked up at her. "I looked," he said. She blinked. "But not like that." He stood slowly, not rising to meet her, but to level with her. "I looked because you were standing in my home, soaked and exhausted, trying not to collapse. I looked because you looked like someone who hadn't been seen in a long time." "Not really." Naren's throat tightened. She looked away, just briefly. When she spoke again, her voice was thinner. "I don't know what to do when someone doesn't want anything from me." Darien's tone didn't waver. "Then maybe you've never been safe enough to find out." She laughed, quietly, not humor. More like a breath she'd forgotten to release. "I don't know what I am when I'm not for sale," she said. He didn't respond with a platitude. He didn't say she was free now. It would have sounded false, like hope too far ahead of reality. Instead, he said, "You're here. That's enough." The words settled between them like something placed, not thrown. They didn't touch. They didn't move closer, but something had shifted permanently. A wall hadn't fallen, but it had opened, just wide enough to be seen through. That night, when he returned to his mat by the control terminal, he noticed the door to the sleeping room was slightly ajar. Not broken, not forgotten. Left open on purpose. Elia slept curled in her blanket. Nest. Naren had curled near the edge of the cot, her hand resting lightly against the girl's back. Not protectively, but with familiarity. Darien lay down and listened. The tower didn't creak. The storm didn't return. And silence no longer meant solitude. The fifth morning broke quietly. Sunlight slipped through the greenhouse canopy, filtered in amber and blue. Elia woke early, wandered barefoot into the kitchen space and found him boiling water over the solar coil. She sat beside the counter, her blanket trailing behind her like a robe. "I remember my mother's voice," she said, unprompted. "But not her face." Darien didn't answer. He didn't have to. She continued. "Naren sleeps too lightly. That means she's scared." He turned. "How do you know that? I used to sleep like that." He poured the warm water into a filter tube, letting it drip through the herb leaves he'd saved for special cycles. It smelled like basil and ash root, the kind of scent you only appreciated when everything else was quiet enough to notice. "She's trying not to be scared around you," Elia added. Darien met her gaze. "Is she succeeding?" Elia nodded. "Mostly." He smiled faintly. "And what about you?" Elia shrugged. "I'm still deciding." He handed her a mug cooler than his. She sipped it carefully. "Then, you like her?" It wasn't a question. It was a truth voiced without weight, like a child saying the sky was blue. Darien didn't reply. "You do," she repeated. "But you don't want her to know yet." Still, no answer. But his breath had caught just slightly, and she saw it. She set her mug down. "Will you keep us?" Her voice didn't crack. It didn't plead. But her eyes held the edge of something older than a child should carry. Darien exhaled. "Yes." "For how long?" "As long as you want," she nodded. That was enough. That afternoon, Naren moved through the greenhouse with sleeves rolled to her elbows, helping transfer nutrient pods between trays. She didn't ask. She didn't hover. She worked. You look comfortable, Darien said softly, adjusting the irrigation setting. That makes you uncomfortable? She replied, teasing but carefully. He shook his head. No, I just don't want to mistake survival for peace. I'm not surviving anymore, she said. He looked at her. Not yet. But you're starting to live. That quieted her. She reached for one of the mist valves, twisting it slightly. Cool water traced her fingertips. I've never had a day without a plan, she said. A next step. A lie ready. A price to pay. She watched the condensation bead against her wrist. Today I didn't prepare for anything. Darien said nothing, but his eyes lingered on her longer than usual. He didn't stop looking, she noticed. Is that the first time you've looked at me like that? She asked. No, he said. But it's the first time I let myself mean it. She didn't smile. She didn't tease. She just turned slightly, letting the sunlight kiss her skin. She stood close enough now that he could smell the scent of herbs and earth on her sleeves. I don't want to be wanted because I'm useful, she whispered. Darien met her eyes. You're wanted because you're here. That night, after the greenhouse lights dimmed and the vents slowed, Elia watched the last sliver of light fade from the upper panels. She looked at Darien and asked, Does this place mean something now? He nodded. She crawled into her blanket nest, pulling the cloth over her head like a curtain. I think we're becoming a story, she said. Darien tilted his head. What kind of story? The kind where no one leaves. Then she closed her eyes. Darien looked at Naren. She looked back and didn't look away. This wasn't survival anymore. This was the beginning of staying. The sixth morning began with a malfunction. It wasn't dramatic. Just a stutter in the heat coil beneath the floor panel near the greenhouse vent. But in a place where life depended on balance, even a flicker meant something. Darien noticed it immediately. He knelt by the junction port and tapped twice on the embedded screen. The coils hummed, then dimmed again. Power dip, small, but not natural. The solar banks were full. No storm. No drain alerts. Something had tugged at the system. He didn't like that. He ran a manual diagnostic, fingers gliding across the pad as lines of code scrolled up, searching for anomalies. Nothing obvious, no signal spikes. But a momentary fluctuation had occurred 3 hours prior. Origin point, access terminal 1A. That was the old emergency relay, the one wired to the lift shaft. Darien stood slowly. He crossed the greenhouse with calm, deliberate steps and entered the side corridor, passing Ilia's sleeping nook. She wasn't awake yet, still curled in her nest, thumb grazing the corner of a folded blanket. Naren wasn't in sight. He descended the narrow service ladder. 2 levels down. The air was colder here, older, untouched by recycled heat. Dust clung to the edges of the metal corridor. He reached the lift panel and stopped. It had been activated manually. Someone had tried to trigger the override. Failed, but still tried. He checked the console. The command had been inputted externally, then aborted. Not a full breach, just a knock. Darien stepped back, jaw tightening. Someone had found them, or they were still looking. He returned to the upper level without rushing. Panic wasn't useful. Preparation was. He passed through the greenhouse, sealed the vent shafts, adjusted the solar priority matrix to reroute power to shielding, then quietly walked back into the central space. Naren stood by the water basin. Sleeves rolled, her arms damp from washing out a cloth. She turned when she saw his face. What is it? She asked immediately. He told her everything. No edits. No softened details. She didn't flinch. She didn't ask how. She only asked one question. Did they see her? Darien shook his head. Not yet. Naren sat down on the bench near the misting valves, one hand gripping the edge. It was only a matter of time. Darien knelt in front of her. It doesn't change anything. Her eyes met his. Doesn't it? He hesitated. We've built something here. That has to mean more than what's chasing you. She didn't. Speak for a while, then softly, if they come, will you run? No, she blinked. Why? Because I'm not letting anyone take what's mine. He hadn't meant to say it like that. But once the words were out, they didn't retract. Naren's eyes widened slightly, but she didn't back away. What are we to you? She asked. He looked at her without blinking. Home. Behind them, Elia's voice came quiet, half asleep. Then can we close the tower now? They both turned. She stood at the hallway entrance, her blanket trailing behind her like a cape. Her hair was tangled. Her eyes were not. I mean, really close it, she said. No more wondering if someone's coming. Darien nodded once. By. Late afternoon, they stood by the lift shaft together, Darien, Naren, Elia dragging the final reinforced steel panel into place. It took 3 hours to bolt down completely. Each bolt was turned by Elia's hands. She insisted. When the last one clicked into place, Darien crouched beside her. It's sealed. Elia looked up. So now we live here forever? As long as you want? She looked between them, him, Naren, then back at the sealed panel. I want to call you something. Darien tilted his head. What? She hesitated. Can I? Anything. She took a breath. You're ours. Naren's breath caught. She didn't hide it. Darien didn't speak. He just nodded once. Elia walked past him, took Naren's hand and squeezed it tightly. That night, Darien rearranged the greenhouse floor. He cleared the crates, rolled out mats, placed 3 cushions in a circle not for sleeping, but for living. He brought out the hidden stores, dried spices, 2 sealed protein packs, and a bag of powdered grain he'd been saving for a moment. That had never come until now. Naren cooked. Elia set the cups. Darien poured the drink. They ate together. They didn't talk much. They didn't have to. Every movement was understood. Afterward, as the greenhouse lights dimmed and the glass above caught the faint shimmer of stars, Naren leaned her head on Darien's shoulder and said quietly, Tell me what you were before this. He thought for a long time. Officially? He said, I tracked soil toxicity patterns, and unofficially? I waited for someone to knock. She smiled. A real one. Small. Honest. Elia fell asleep not long after, curled beside Naren's side with her hand still gripping the edge of the old thermal blanket. Darien lifted her gently, carried her to her nest. Don't leave, she mumbled against his shoulder. I won't. He whispered. And this time he meant it. When he returned to the central room, Naren was still awake, sitting cross-legged on the mat, watching the light flicker on the ceiling. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She reached out. Her hand. He took it. The tower didn't feel like protection anymore. It felt like belonging, not a place to hide, a place to stay. The wind didn't return for 5 days. The tower was still, sealed, and sunlit, not by chance, but by choice. In the greenhouse, the filtered morning light painted gold across the upper glass. The soil beds warmed gently. The leaves turned to catch the light like they had always belonged here. Elia had taken to folding things again, small bits of synthcloth, towel edges, strips of packaging, folding them into tiny geometric patterns and setting them along the greenhouse ledge like decorations. No one told her to stop. Darien noticed that she now slept in the same corner every night without needing to be watched. That meant something. She wasn't afraid she'd be left behind. In the kitchen alcove, Naren stood by the basin with sleeves rolled, her hands damp and glistening. She was barefoot, shirt unbuttoned at the collar, hair down. She had taken time this morning, not for anyone else, but for herself. Darien watched her for a moment from across the greenhouse, the way she moved. The way she didn't flinch when he looked. She caught him watching, not the first time. But this time she didn't look away. She dried her hand slowly and walked toward him. She stopped when she reached him, close, so close her hip brushed his side. "I want you again," she said, quietly but firmly. He looked at her face. Her eyes were steady. "I want you now, not to trade, not to survive. I want you because I choose you." Darien's chest tightened, but not with fear. He reached for her hand and brought it to his lips, kissed her knuckles. Then he kissed her mouth. They moved together toward the greenhouse floor where the warm air pooled beneath the glass. She undid her shirt herself this time, slowly. Not to seduce, but to be seen. She let it fall and stood there bare, radiant in the soft light, unafraid. Darien undressed with the same quiet reverence. There was no hurry, no performance. Just one dot when they came together. It was not in desperate motion, but slow connection too. People pressing into each other not to escape, but to belong. Their breaths blended. Their bodies moved with purpose, slow and grounded. When she wrapped her legs around him, it wasn't to possess, it was to invite. Her hands guided him without words. Her mouth parted against his neck as they moved together, rhythm building in quiet waves. When release came, it wasn't loud. It wasn't explosive. It was relief. It was arrival. Later, wrapped in one of the woven blankets, her head against his chest, she whispered, "You didn't just make love to me. You gave me myself back." Darien kissed her temple. She lay still. For a moment, then said, "My real name isn't Norrin." He paused. "I started using that name when I ran. It was easier to disappear if I wasn't myself anymore." He didn't ask what her old name was. "This one suits you," he said. She smiled softly and whispered, "You're not going to ask why I ran?" "No," he said. "You're not running now." That night, Darien didn't sleep. He lay with her in his arms, listening to Elia's quiet breathing in the other room and the faint hum of the greenhouse vents. For the first time in years, his thoughts didn't spin in loops of isolation. They rested, anchored by weight, warmth, and presence. The next morning, while Elia was reading near the heat duct, she looked up suddenly and said, "I think Norrin's
ready." Darien looked at her. "Ready for what?" Elia shrugged.
"To stop hiding in other people's stories." Darien crouched beside her. "And what about you?" "I never had a story," she said. "I just followed people into theirs." She stared at the far window. "But this place feels like one, a story where no one dies at the end." Darien placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She leaned into it. Later that day, Darien climbed the maintenance ladder to the top dome of the greenhouse. The final solar fastener had come loose. As he tightened it, he looked down and saw the home they had built together. Not the glass and soil, the people inside it. Elia by the heater, sketching shapes into dust. Norrin preparing water for tea. The smell of ashroot and steam curling up into the vents. He descended, touched the floor, and felt something he hadn't in years. Peace. That evening, as the light faded, Elia pulled out a small clay pot. Inside it was a fresh root cutting a baby vine from the air-purifying plants Darien had cultivated. "This one's mine," she said. "I'll take care of it." Darien nodded. "It'll need warmth." "And space." Elia looked up. "Like us?" He smiled. In the quiet that followed dinner, Norrin sat beside him in the central room. The lights were low. Elia had fallen asleep on her lap again. Norrin looked at him. "Tell me who you were," she said. Darien exhaled. "I used to work for the registry." Her brow furrowed. "The one that tagged Elia?" He nodded. "I was a systems analyst. I tracked population movement and transfer orders. One day, a file crossed my desk, an unaccompanied minor. tagged as pending disposition. It meant she was going to disappear. He looked down. I deleted the file. Naren stared at him. They didn't know it was me, but I knew. And I couldn't stay after that, so I left. I found this tower and didn't tell anyone where I went. She reached out and took his hand. You? Tried to save someone once, she said. Now you did. Ilya stirred and whispered without opening her eyes, Don't go. I won't, he said. Ever. Later, when Ilya was asleep in her nest and Naren had closed the door just half whenever all the way Darien sat at the console and shut off the external beacon. The tower was fully sealed now, not a bunker, not a prison. A home. In the silence that followed, he leaned back and let the hum of the greenhouse wash over him. Not alone. Not drifting. Together. Complete. And free.